It's late at night. All is silent around, with only the occasional sound of a dog barking in the distance, or a restless villager turning over in their sleep. You, my dear friend, are comfortably nestled in a pile of relatively dry straw, humming a satisfied little tune through your nose. Yes, you are a pig living an ordinary life in medieval Europe, and most of the time, the world you see is from just a little above the ground. At dawn, before the first rays of sunlight break through the crooked wooden rooftops, you're already woken up by the grumbling of your stomach. Stretching lazily and shaking off the lingering chill clinging to your body, your day begins. Life, for you, is simple and pure. The most delightful thing is nothing more than rolling around in the soft mud at the edge of the village, savouring the cool, moist soil enveloping your entire body. Ah, that is simply pig heaven. Mud is your best friend, your cool blanket in summer, and your toy when boredom strikes. You use your strong, powerful nose to root around in the soil, hoping to uncover some overlooked delicacies. A trampled fruit, a discarded vegetable root, or, if particularly lucky, a small piece of hard bread mixed with grease. Humans, those two-legged creatures, are an indispensable part of your background life. Most of the time, they're quite busy, mumbling incomprehensible gibberish, always holding various kinds of tools in their hands. Some humans, like that chubby man who often comes over carrying a wooden bucket, are ones you look forward to seeing. His bucket always contains good stuff: kitchen scraps of vegetable leaves, wheat bran, sour milk, and occasionally a few chunks of meaty bones. Some humans, especially those energetic little brats, are not as friendly. They'll chase you with small sticks, screaming loudly, driving you away from the rare patch of sunlight you manage to find. You usually just flick your tail impatiently, grunt a couple of times, and don't stoop to their level. After all, chasing and playing with pigs is too exhausting. It's better to sleep a little more, or root around the ground a few extra times. The medieval village, or perhaps town where you live, is like a massive playground to you. Unlike your kin in later times, confined to small pigsties, you enjoy considerable freedom. During the day, you and your companions wander in small groups along the muddy streets, rub yourselves against the corners of houses, and scavenge for discarded food at the edges of the market. This freedom is hard-earned. It is also the most authentic part of your existence as a pig. Of course, this freedom also means that you frequently encounter the complexities of human rules and ways of life. Yet at that time, you were completely unaware of this and entirely indifferent to it. You didn't realize that the humans you saw merely as providers of food or occasional sources of trouble actually regarded you and all your kind as a crucial part of their lives. Yes, my friend, you pigs made remarkable contributions to the medieval economy. People needed your meat to fill their bellies, your fat for lighting lamps and cooking, and even your skin and bones were never wasted. You might occasionally see some of your companions being led away by humans with ropes, never to return. Their screams can faintly drift through the air, accompanied by a scent you don't particularly like but are quite familiar with. Humans call it slaughter. It's their way of obtaining food. At the time, it was usually done openly, a scene so common it blended into everyday life. You, in a sense, are a walking steak, a mobile oil tank. Of course, you certainly don't like to think of yourself that way. You'd rather consider yourself a philosopher in the mud, a contemplator under the sun. What makes it even harder for you to comprehend is, in these humans' mindset, animals, including you, are sometimes regarded as, well, how should I put it, machines or robots. They believe a great inventor created all things and predetermined how you animals should function. If your behaviors and actions meet their expectations, then all is well. But once you malfunction or act in ways they deem inappropriate, they become very surprised, perhaps even angry. That's quite a strange thought. You clearly feel like you have thoughts, emotions. You cry out when hungry, hum when happy. So, how could you just be a machine programmed to behave in a certain way? You just want to be a happy pig, and not a mere cog in the hands of some inventor. Every now and then, you catch some vague words from human conversations, like order or hierarchy. They seem to place great importance on these concepts, believing the world should operate according to some fixed patterns. In this model, humans stand high above, while animals like you are beneath them. This so-called great chain of being is something your pig brain simply cannot comprehend. To you, the hierarchy within the pigsty or the pecking order during feeding, that is the real, tangible order. As for the things humans talk about, they sound like the buzzing of mosquitoes on a summer night. Annoying, but as long as they don't land on you, they're easy to ignore. However, this carefree, blissful life of rolling in the mud is actually far more fragile than you imagine. Sometimes you hear humans raising their voices and shouting words like justice or judgment during arguments. These words mean nothing to you, like the shadow of leaves rustling in the wind. You twitch your ears and keep sniffing the ground, searching for your next tasty bite. Little do you know, these words that you now pay no attention to will soon envelop you like an invisible net, overwhelming everything around you, dragging you into a bizarre encounter you could never have imagined. At that point, you likely won't think of them as just irrelevant buzzing sounds anymore. But for now, the sun is shining, the earth smells fresh, and you let out a big yawn, ready to nap a little longer. After all, being a medieval pig is hard work, isn't it? It should have been nothing more than an ordinary afternoon, with the sunlight lazily spilling over the village square. The air was filled with the scent of hay and a medley of aromas drifting from stoves both near and far. You burped contentedly, having just finished a rather decent lunch. Some vegetable leaves and slop mixed with crumbs. At this moment, you're resting leisurely under the shade of an old oak tree at the edge of the village, with several newborn piglets that are still stumbling as they walk. The little piglets snuggle against your side, letting out soft grunts as if they're dreaming sweetly. Everything is so calm, perfectly matching your idea of a lovely afternoon. You even start absent-mindedly planning. Once the sun drifts further west, you'll take the little ones to the creek outside the village to cool off and perhaps teach them how to roll in the mud in the most comfortable way. However, the gears of fate always quietly shift towards an unknown direction without warning. A group of human children came noisily running from the far end of the village, waving small wooden sticks in their hands, their faces filled with a mix of excitement and mischief. The expression you find most disagreeable. Normally you avoid these little brats whenever possible. Being chased all over the village by them is certainly beneath your dignity as a grown sow. But today, beside you are those few little ones crying for food. The maternal instincts of a sow make you more vigilant. A little boy seems more reckless than the other children, holding a sharpened stick while running and loudly mimicking a wolf's howl, charging toward you and your piglets. Perhaps he simply finds it amusing. Maybe he wants to show off his bravery in front of his companions. But to you, the sharp cries and rapidly approaching figure are undoubtedly a threat. You abruptly rise to your feet, letting out a low, warning growl from your throat. Your piglets, startled by the sudden commotion, scurry to hide behind you. They emit terrified shrieks, but the little boy doesn't seem to heed your warning. Instead, he grows even more excited. He gets closer and closer, the stick in his hand almost about to poke one of your piglets. At that very moment, all your rationality is overtaken by a primal instinct to protect your young. Without much thought, you instinctively rushed forward, trying to drive this threat away from your child. What happened next? Remains in your memory as a chaotic and terrifying whirlpool. You only recall letting out a loud, angry scream, followed by the sharper cries of the human child, the terrified screams of other kids nearby, and the sight of them scattering and fleeing. You felt yourself hit something soft, and then it fell over. When you calmed down a bit, shaking your head in an attempt to see the situation clearly, you saw the little boy lying motionless on the ground. There seemed to be blood on his face and arms. You smelled that familiar, unsettling scent of rust. You froze, completely unable to understand what had happened. You only wanted to protect your child. You never intended to hurt anyone. You are a pig. You only know to eat when hungry and sleep when tired. When faced with danger, you must protect yourself and your children. The complex concepts of harm and death in the human world are as distant and elusive to you as the floating clouds on the horizon. Your first reaction is fear, a massive, unprecedented fear that freezes you in place. You want to run away, to take your children far from this place of trouble. You let out a series of short, anxious grunts, urging the trembling little piglets to follow you quickly. But it is already too late. The screams and cries of humans ripple outward like stones thrown into the surface of a bottle-necked lake. Soon, the village adults rush over in alarm. They first gather around the little boy lying on the ground, exclaiming and weeping. Then their gazes, as sharp as swords, all turn toward you. You see the expressions on their faces, transforming rapidly from initial shock and sorrow to anger and hatred. That look in their eyes, you had never seen it on a human face before. It was a look that wanted to devour you alive. It's that pig, that damned pig. A man pointed at you, his voice trembling with rage. It killed that child. It's a murderer. A woman screamed hysterically. Catch it! Don't let it escape! The crowd began to close in on you. They held sticks, pitchforks, and some even raised stones. The air around you seemed to freeze, thick with danger and hostility. Your piglets pressed tightly against your legs in fear, letting out pitiful squeals. You stumbled backward in panic, a helpless wail escaping your throat. You tried to explain in your simple pig's language that you didn't mean to, that you only wanted to protect your children. But they didn't understand, or rather they didn't want to. In their eyes, you were no longer the ordinary sow that provided meat and disposed of kitchen scraps for the village. You became a murderer, a demon, a criminal who must be punished. You don't realize that in the human world, when a pig harms a child, especially a human child, it's not merely an accident, but a grave challenge to their established order. To them, you, a humble livestock, have dared to harm a noble human, a crime that is utterly unforgivable. What you don't know is that sometimes, when such tragedies occur, people won't just hold you, the offending pig, accountable. Even your owner might get implicated for failing to keep you under control. You catch a glimpse of your owner, the usually kind old farmer, now standing on the outskirts of the crowd, his face pale, his eyes brimming with fear and despair. He looks at you, his lips moving slightly as if trying to speak, but ultimately he just lowers his head helplessly. In ancient Roman law, the owner might be held more accountable, as livestock were seen as blameless. But in the era you live in this place, people's anger and ancient traditions often outweigh the distant laws written on parchment. At this moment, you are the one and only culprit in their eyes, the one who must bear all the blame. Amidst the chaos, all you feel is despair and that one unintentional, instinctive scream. That time, the clash to protect the child unexpectedly brought such terrifying consequences. You, an ordinary sow, have been thrust onto a judgment stage shaped by human anger and fear, one you cannot comprehend or escape. Human roars surge toward you like a tidal wave, causing your eardrums to throb faintly. Those faces that were once just blurred backgrounds in your eyes are now twisted, filled with a ferocity you cannot comprehend. Fingers one by one, fingers like rows of tiny spears, all point at you in unison, bearing the weight of an entire army. Murderer, a beast possessed by a demon, kill it. Avenge the poor child. You cannot grasp the specific meanings of these words, but the malice and murderous intent in their tone pierce your skin like icy needles. You frantically look around, hoping to find an escape route, but the crowd has already formed an impenetrable circle around you. The burning fury in their eyes sends a chill down your spine. Your piglets are terrified out of their wits, clinging tightly under you, letting out faint, desperate cries. Instinctively, you want to shield them more closely, but you yourself are in deep water, barely able to protect yourself. A few bold men, holding thick ropes and wooden sticks, slowly approach you. You nervously back away, letting out a threatening growl from your throat, trying to scare them off. But in their eyes, your resistance only further confirms your savage nature. Look, he's still trying to attack. Quick, catch him. You charge left and right, trying to escape their encirclement. But your strength feels so insignificant against the fury of so many humans. A cold rope suddenly tightens around your neck, pulling tight and making it almost impossible to breathe. Immediately, more ropes were bound tightly around your body, around your limbs. You struggled desperately, letting out harrowing screams, but it was all in vain. You were dragged roughly by them, your legs leaving chaotic marks on the ground. The muddy fur you once took pride in was now painfully constricted by the ropes, leaving you feeling an unprecedented humiliation and fear. You were no longer the pig that could roam freely. You had become a criminal, a prisoner awaiting judgment. In the midst of this chaos, you caught sight of someone dressed more formally than the average villager, his face stern as he directed the crowd. He might have been the village steward, or perhaps some small official sent by a neighbouring settlement. His presence seemed to lend a touch of official authority to this otherwise primal act of capture and fury. Yes, my friend, even when arresting a pig, humans prefer to abide by some form of procedure. You were dragged through streets that were once familiar, but now brimmed with hostility. The crowd lined up on both sides, their gazes like searchlights fixed on you, filled with curiosity, fear, and even a hint of schadenfreude. You hear children's muffled giggles, women's hushed whispers, and men's coarse curses. In this moment, you've been transformed from an ordinary villager to a defendant under the scrutiny of everyone. This transformation is so abrupt, so absurd. You merely did what a sow might do under certain circumstances. yet you're bearing consequences so heavy that you can't possibly comprehend them. They dragged you to a place you've never been before. It resembles an abandoned livestock shed, or perhaps a makeshift ramshackle jail. You were shoved inside roughly, and a heavy wooden door behind you slammed shut with a bang. The ropes weren't untied from your body. They constricted you tightly, leaving you unable to move. You anxiously survey this unfamiliar and oppressive space, dimly lit, with a damp, mouldy smell lingering in the air. You hear the footsteps and voices of human guards outside, and they seem to be discussing your crimes and how you should be dealt with. You are unaware that in the human legal system, animals, especially animals like you, accused of committing grave crimes, can indeed be arrested, imprisoned and made to await a formal trial. This might sound like a mere fantasy, but in that era, it was something that truly happened. For example, in 1386 in Falaise, France, there was a pig whose fate bore striking similarities to yours. After being accused of killing an infant, it was first arrested, then imprisoned, and finally brought to trial. These arrests and imprisonments were not merely to prevent you from escaping. According to some scholars, there is a deeper meaning hidden within these actions. They believe that by arresting and imprisoning these criminal animals, human society was engaging in a ritualistic act. This act transformed you from being a mere animal into a legal entity, a defendant who could stand trial. This sounds rather complicated. Simply put, they sought to humanize you, at least within the legal process, making you appear like a human criminal. Of course, you don't know anything about it. All you feel is pain, hunger, and endless fear. You don't know what you did wrong, nor do you know what awaits you. You curl up on the cold ground, the rope coils around you like a venomous snake. You begin to yearn for the days when you could roll in the mud, for the warmth of sunlight on your back and the soft touch of piglets snuggling beside you. Outside, the humans are still chattering endlessly, their voices seeping through the cracks in the wooden boards, like tiny hammers pounding on your fragile nerves. You hear them talk about trials, judges, and gallows. These words sound to you like curses from another world, filled with ominous foreboding. You start to realize the rules of the human world you once ignored, the justice and punishment you thought would never concern you. Now they are opening their bloodthirsty jaws, ready to devour you. And you, a simple pig, what can you do other than let out a few helpless grunts? Your world was completely turned upside down the moment a human finger pointed at you. You were rudely shoved and stumbled into a place you never could have imagined. This place is completely different from the warm and cozy pigsty you're familiar with, and also unlike the hay-filled stable you occasionally sneak into for a nap. This place feels more like, a den specifically designed for villains. The lighting is dim, with only a few faint rays of sunlight squeezing through the tiny slits of high windows, leaving streaks of pale light suspended in the dusty air. Surrounding you are cold stone walls, and the floor is hard-packed dirt, without even a single strand of straw to roll on for comfort. The air is filled with a strange odour, a mix of mould, urine stench, and some indescribable rotten smell. The smell makes you involuntarily snort, and here it is, your new home, a temporary pig prison cell. Perhaps it was once a solitary cell for some unlucky human prisoner, or maybe just a discarded storage room hastily remodelled. Either way, for you, this place is absolutely dreadful. The ropes around your neck and body haven't been untied. They still cling tightly to you, causing pain with every movement, You try to shift your body, you try to find a slightly more comfortable position, but the space is simply too cramped. You are pressed tightly against the cold wall, and a wave of loneliness engulfs you like a rising tide. You are a pig accustomed to life in a group, always surrounded by the grunts and comforting warmth of your companions. But now, you are alone. You can't hear the familiar snores, nor smell the reassuring scent of your companions. There is only endless silence and the occasional, nerve-wracking sound of human footsteps from outside. You begin to feel afraid, a bone-deep chill taking hold of you. You don't know why you are here, nor what will happen next. All you know is that you miss your piglets dearly. You wonder how they are now. Are they scared? Are they hungry? Thinking of them fills your heart with sorrow and pain. Occasionally, a human walks to the door of your cell and peers inside through the small window or the gaps in the bars, their gazes varying greatly. Some people gaze with obvious curiosity, as if they're seeing a caged pig for the first time. Others display disgust and contempt, as if you are something filthy and repulsive. Then there are those whose eyes gleam with schadenfreude. It sends chills down your spine. They whisper among themselves, pointing at you. You can't understand what they're saying, but you sense their words are about you, and they're far from kind. They bring you some food and water, but the food is usually just hard. Bread crusts and mouldy fodder, and the water has a strange taste. Compared to the delicious meals you once had at your master's house, the difference is stark, yet you're too hungry. You can't help but devour it all, hoping to build up some strength to face your uncertain fate. What you don't know is that imprisoning a pig like yourself was considered a serious matter by humans of the time, even with legal justification. According to historical records, animals accused of crimes were indeed formally arrested and imprisoned, awaiting trial. For instance, in Normandy in 1349, a pig accused of eating a child was imprisoned for as long as 146 days. Even more astonishing, the records show that the pig's daily expenses in prison were the same as those of human prisoners, 2 deniers, a currency of that time. This was no small expense. It highlights the seriousness with which humans treated this matter. Why imprison a pig? Was it merely to prevent its escape? Probably not entirely. Some scholars who study this period of history believe there is a deeper symbolic meaning behind it. They argue that by imprisoning animals in an environment similar to that of human criminals, human society was performing a procedural step aimed at transforming the animal from ordinary livestock into a defendant subject to legal judgment. It's akin to labeling you as a human criminal, making you formally align with their complex legal system. Scholar Esther Cohen has proposed a similar viewpoint. He believes this anthropomorphizing process is a way for humans to reassert their dominance over nature. Of course, these profound theories mean nothing to you. A pig trapped in captivity. All you know is that this place is cold and unyielding, and you are hungry and afraid. You just want to return to your warm mud pit and cuddle with your children. As days go by, your perception of the outside world grows increasingly blurred. You don't know whether it's day or night, nor how long you've been confined. The only thing you can do is curl up in the corner, trembling, depleting your already limited energy as you wait endlessly. You start having strange dreams. In your dreams, you return to a sunny meadow. The piglets frolic joyfully around you, and the air is filled with the fragrance of grass and soil. But when you wake, you are greeted once again by cold stone walls and a despairing darkness. You, this pitiful pig, are left waiting in the carefully crafted pig basket prison humans made for you, awaiting that inevitably absurd trial. Apart from occasionally letting out a helpless grunt or two, you remain completely unaware of what is about to happen and are powerless to change it. This imprisonment is nothing more than a long and painful prelude for you. Inside your cold, damp, solitary pig cell, the days stretch on endlessly and with excruciating monotony. Aside from the occasional guard bringing in barely edible food and water, you rarely see any other living beings. However, the muffled voices of humans perpetually drift through the cracks in the door and walls, buzzing in your ears like annoying flies. At first, you paid no attention to these sounds. They were nothing more than meaningless noise interrupting your monotonous days. But gradually, you began to use your unique pig-like instincts to sift through these sounds, trying to uncover faint clues about your fate. You perked up your ears, straining to catch the repeated words that seemed to hold significance. You heard them talking about order, which seemed to be something immensely important and inviolable. They said that you, a pig, had done something you shouldn't have, such as harming a human child, and this act disrupted their sacred world order. In this order, humans are supreme, and you animals should obediently remain beneath humans. Therefore, this upcoming trial is like a Christmas ceremony. The purpose is to restore the order you disrupted, as if you overturned a stone trough, and they solemnly set it upright again, reciting incantations for hours. You hear them arguing over things that leave you even more puzzled, like the soul and morality, wondering whether you animals have souls just like humans. If you do have souls, does that then mean you can distinguish between right and wrong and must bear moral responsibility for your actions? Thinking that your fleshy or lean body might contain possibly a soul responsible for sins as well, you feel utterly uneasy and just want to roll in a muddy puddle to shake off all these chaotic thoughts. They would even mention stories from ancient holy books, like that of Noah, who brought various animals onto a great ark to escape a massive flood, or reference some legal code stating that if an ox gores a person to death, the ox must be executed. These ancient stories seem to have become the basis for believing that animals should also face trials and punishment, just like humans. You can vaguely hear that the human church isn't entirely certain whether animals truly possess souls. On one hand, they seem to believe that animal souls are not comparable to human souls. On the other hand, their church courts would solemnly expel or curse swarms of destructive rats or locusts. This is truly contradictory. Friend, don't assume these are merely nonsensical human claims. In those times, animal trials were a genuine legal practice that lasted for centuries. Similar cases were documented from France to Switzerland, from Germany to Italy. According to incomplete statistics, there are records of approximately 200 animal trial cases, but the actual number is likely much higher. Moreover, these trials were categorized and conducted with a formal process. Large livestock, like you, accused of injuring or even killing humans, would typically be sent to secular courts to face severe punishments, such as hanging or burning. And those numerous small pests that are difficult to control individually, such as rats, locusts, and caterpillars that eat crops, were handled by the church court. The usual verdicts were curses, excommunication, or banishment. By this standard, this pig accused of murder ranks as a heavyweight in the hierarchy of animal crimes. Naturally, The question of why humans went to such lengths to put animals on trial has been the subject of much debate among later scholars. Some scholars believe that people of that time genuinely thought animals possessed a certain degree of moral awareness or could be possessed by evil spirits, thus committing crimes. Therefore, the trials were a necessary response to such evil acts. Other scholars, such as a modern researcher named Sven Kings, argue that medieval people were not actually ignorant. They knew animals could neither comprehend courtroom accusations nor express remorse. However, when unfortunate events occurred, especially when animals harmed humans and shattered their sacred belief in the hierarchy of humans above beasts, they felt compelled to do something to mend this rupture, to reaffirm human authority and the order of the world. The trial is precisely such a symbolic ceremony. Another perspective suggests that these trials were, to some extent, meant to intimidate the animal owners, reminding them to keep a close watch over their animals and prevent them from causing trouble. Furthermore, some scholars have pointed out that animal trials served as a valuable opportunity for legal practitioners at the time to hone their skills. It was also a stage for them to showcase their eloquence and legal expertise. After all, handling a case involving a pig or a group of rats with flair was considered a skill in itself. You curled up in a cold cell, listening to the discussions about your fate outside, felt nothing but waves of dizziness and confusion. Soul, order, morality. These concepts were far too distant for you, too complicated. You were just a pig seeking food when hungry and warmth when cold. You overturned the stone trough, and they would hit you a few times. You stole crops from the field, and they would chase you away. But now, they seem to be using a logic you could not possibly comprehend to decide your life or death. Why is this happening? You shook your heavy head and let out a helpless, low grunt. Just as you began to feel increasingly hopeless about your predicament, and more confused by the strange ideas of humans, the cell door creaked open. You raised your head cautiously, thinking it was that expressionless guard bringing the unpalatable food again. But this time, the person who entered made you, if pigs could raise their brows, lift one in surprise. He was also a two-legged human, but his attire was vastly different from that of the villagers, farmers, or even the minor officials you occasionally glimpsed. He wore a seemingly thick and dark-coloured robe. The fabric of the robe appeared to be of better quality than your master's finest holiday coat. His face bore an expression, well, a mix of seriousness, confusion, and perhaps a faint touch of a professional smile. If wigs had been popular at that time, he might have had a fluffy mass on his head, something you'd want to nudge with your nose. He approached your cell, peering at you carefully through the crude wooden bars. Feeling uneasy under his gaze, you instinctively backed away. A cautious growl escaped your throat. Don't be afraid, my poor beast," he spoke, his voice sounding fairly gentle, but the term, beast, well, although that is true, hearing it from someone who is supposed to help you, it feels somewhat unpleasant. I'm appointed by the court to be your defense counsel. Defense counsel. What's this new term? You blink your small eyes, trying to glean something from his face. He seemed to notice your confusion, or perhaps he was just used to talking to clients who didn't understand him, and he continued explaining. Simply put, I am the one who will speak on your behalf during this trial. Although, speaking on behalf of a pig, this is also my first time doing so. He gave a bitter smile and scratched his head, seemingly finding this task a bit tricky as well. Of course, you wouldn't know that during that era, even animals that were defendants, especially in church courts, were sometimes assigned a defense lawyer. This was considered part of demonstrating procedural justice to make the trial appear more legitimate and more aligned with the norms of human law. Of course, in serious cases like yours that are tried in secular courts, whether there is a lawyer defending you, that might be less certain, or rather more like a judge's whim of grace. This gentleman who claims to be your defender has begun his task. He walked around your cell a few times, occasionally stopping, bending down and carefully observing your expressions, your movements, even your grunting sounds. He mumbles to himself, seemingly jotting down notes. Your mental state seems okay. No obvious signs of madness. A few grunts. Are they signs of fear or disdain? That's hard to tell. His gaze makes you feel uneasy, wishing you could crawl into a corner. What is he doing? Is he expecting to find some kind of defense in your snoring sounds? You cry when you're hungry, grunt when you're in pain, and roll around when you're happy. Is this supposed to be your testimony? What you don't know is that in history, there actually were some lawyers who became famous for defending animals. Of course, their notoriety might have been quite peculiar. One of the most famous figures is Barthélemy de Chasseneuil. This 16th century French lawyer once successfully defended a group of rats accused of devouring barley. One of the arguments he made was that the rats were too afraid of the village's cats to safely leave their fields and appear in court. This seemingly absurd defense actually worked at the time. Mr. Chasseneuil thus became a legendary figure in the realm of animal defense, a true legend. There's even a movie based on his story called The Hour of the Pig. In the United States, it was released as The Advocate. It tells the story of him defending a pig accused of murder, a tale of his legal defense. Your lawyer may not be as legendary as Mr. Chasseneuil, but he certainly seems to be trying to do something for you. He begins asking you some questions. So then, do you have anything to say about what happened that afternoon? Why did you attack that child? Was it because you were frightened? Or was there some other reason? Naturally, you can only respond with a series of grunts and headshakes. He frowned. He seemed to be trying hard to interpret your response. The grunting was rather urgent. There was a noticeable dodging motion of the head. This could perhaps be interpreted as you indeed being in a state of stress. At that moment, he muttered to himself, and then wrote something down in his little notebook. Watching his serious demeanour, you suddenly felt that this scene was both pitiful and laughable. A highly educated human was actually questioning a pig and trying to find legal grounds in the pig's grunts. This world is truly insane. However, on the other hand, having such a human stand on your side is still better than everyone pointing fingers at you and cursing. It's somewhat better, isn't it? Although you don't expect him to say anything that could save you from disaster through some pig speech, at least as you head toward that unknown courtroom, you won't be completely alone. This pig and dog lawyer outside your cell walked around for quite a while, asked many questions you couldn't understand or answer, observed many things that to you appeared to be nothing more than normal pig behaviour. In the end, he seemed to have gained some insight. He nodded and said to you, "All right, poor fellow, I'll do my best. Though the hope is slim, we have to try, right?" After saying that, he turned and left, leaving you behind, confused in the darkness. You didn't know what he meant by justice or fairness would look like. Nor did you understand what he gathered from your grunts and squeals, how much weight those would hold before the human judges who would decide your fate. Truly, would they carry any weight? But at least in your simple pig brain, for the first time, you had a vague notion that perhaps not all humans were intent on putting you to death immediately. Could this be considered a glimmer of hope? You didn't dare think further. You simply lay down, exhausted, waiting for that fateful and extraordinary trial. Finally, that day arrived with the morning. Before the day had fully broken, you were awakened by a rough jerk. A few guards with unfriendly faces loosened part of the ropes binding you, allowing you to move a little. Then they shoved you out of the cold, dark prison of Juran. You were led along, walking through the quiet streets of the village in the early morning. The houses on both sides still had their doors and windows tightly shut, but you could still feel from behind the cracks in those windows curious and complex gazes cast upon you. Occasionally, you would hear a few suppressed coughs, or an early rising housewife opening her courtyard gate with a creak. As daylight gradually broke, more people began to appear on the streets. When you, the drunken pig, were paraded through, the crowd immediately erupted with all kinds of noises. Some were whispering and pointing. Some children hid fearfully behind the adults, peeking at you cautiously, while others, more mischievous, laughed mockingly at your misfortune. Some even picked up pebbles by the roadside and threw them at you. Luckily, the guard stopped them in time. You hung your head, silently enduring it all, your heart filled with humiliation and unease. You were brought to a place you had never seen before, in front of a rather imposing building. That might be the village council hall, or perhaps the hall of a nearby neighbour's castle. A few guards holding long spears stood at the entrance. Their expressions were as indifferent as those of your cell guards. As you step into the hall, you are immediately struck by the scene before you. It is far more spacious than you imagined, yet it feels even more oppressive. At the far end of the hall stands a tall platform. Seated atop it is a man wearing an ornate robe, an elderly man with a stern expression. He is undoubtedly the judge. Beneath the platform sit several individuals engrossed in writing. They are likely the clerks responsible for record keeping. On both sides of the hall, the space is packed with villagers who have gathered to witness the spectacle. Their gazes were like countless little brushes sweeping over you, making you feel as if you were stripped of all your fur, exposed bare in front of everyone. Your prominent lawyer also arrived. He stood in a spot that seemed as if it had been prepared just for him. His expression was solemn. From time to time, he shot you a look whose meaning you couldn't quite figure out. Was it encouragement, or was it sympathy? You were led to the centre of the hall, into a small makeshift defendant's dock, surrounded by a wooden fence. You stood there, uneasy and nervous, unsure where to place your hooves. You caught sight of the famous pig from Falaise, who before execution was also reportedly chained. You lowered your head and looked at the ropes still tied around your body. The ropes, and an overwhelming sense of sorrow filled your heart. The atmosphere in the courtroom was unimaginably solemn, even carrying a hint of almost sadistic rigour. You heard the judge, in a slow and clear tone, begin to read aloud legal provisions you could not understand at all. Those rhythmic syllables sounded to you like some kind of ancient and mysterious spell. You have no idea This seemingly absurd trial strictly followed the procedures of that time, including all the procedures and rituals of human courts, from the judge's attire to the clerk's documentation and even the lawyer's debates, if your lawyer actually had the chance to argue. Everything sought to abide by proper rules. This was not a casual farce, but rather a meticulously choreographed symbolic legal performance. In those times, the judges presiding over the trials, the executioners carrying out sentences, along with other related court officials, were as professional as those handling human cases. The costs incurred from putting a pig on trial, such as witness summoning fees, lawyer's remuneration if your lawyer was not offering free services, even the food expenses during your detention, were all recorded in detail and borne by the public treasury. You look around, watching those serious-faced humans, observing the expressions on their faces. We're doing something very important and very sacred, written all over them. You suddenly feel as though you've stumbled into a realm completely alien to you, a bizarre and surreal dream. Some scholars believe that this ceremonial obsession with legal procedures. This is precisely one of the notable features of medieval animal trials. For example, a scholar named Paul Sifberman has suggested that when an unfortunate event, such as accidentally injuring a child, happens, the entire world, in people's eyes, becomes chaotic and unpredictable. However, through a trial that strictly adheres to the procedures of justice and brings the perpetrator, in this case you, to justice under divine law, the ritual can restore the order of the universe. It allows the world to become stable and comprehensible once again. So, my friend, the court you are in right now, it's not just a place to judge your crimes. It feels more like a stage set up for performing the triumph of justice over evil, a grand play where order is restored. And you, unfortunately, you are the one in this play, destined to be the villain sacrificed. The judge keeps reading those long-winded clauses. You feel a bit thirsty, a little tired. You just want to find a mud puddle to roll around in, to leave behind these annoying voices. But you can't. You can only stand obediently here, enduring what humans have meticulously prepared for you. Something you cannot understand at all. The baptism of law. This is the experience of a medieval animal facing the court for the first time. The judge's lengthy and monotonous opening statement finally comes to an end. Next, it's time for the so-called witnesses to appear. You see one human after another walking out from the audience section, standing in a designated spot, what is likely called, in human court, the witness stand. Before each of them starts talking, they seem to perform a small ritual, such as placing their hand on a thick book or bowing in a certain direction. These formalities leave you utterly confused. Then they start speaking. The story about you. The first to step forward was the woman who, on the day of the incident, first discovered the injured boy, his neighbour, the old lady. She wiped her tears and, with a trembling voice, addressed the judge and jury, if this rudimentary court even had a jury, to accuse you of your heinous crimes. Your Honour, she began. The scene was truly horrifying. My poor little Johnny. He was lying there covered in blood. And this beast, this animal. She pointed angrily, fiercely directed her finger at you. It was just standing there nearby, with blood still smeared on its mouth, and making those smug, grunting noises. Upon hearing this, you couldn't help but let out a protesting grunt. Smug? You were clearly terrified at the time. And the blood on your mouth. It was clearly from your own fright. It was the blood from biting your tongue in panic. but your protests in a human court were clearly useless. Next, several alleged witnesses from the village stepped forward. Their accounts were more or less the same. All emphasized your brutality and supposed aggression. Someone claimed they saw you like a mad beast charging toward the child. Another said they heard you let out a beast-like roar. Some even swear with conviction you previously had a history of attacking other small animals. These testimonies, as you hear them, seem full of flaws, laden with subjective judgments and malicious slander. Yet those judges and clerks listen with a serious demeanour, occasionally nodding as if these were indisputable facts. Your esteemed lawyer occasionally, when certain witnesses were speaking, would stand to raise some objections or attempt to question them briefly, but his faint voice was quickly drowned out by the judge's reprimands or silenced by others hushing. It seemed that in this trial, trying to attain even a sliver of justice for you was practically impossible. You may not realize that in that era, witness testimonies in human courts had questionable reliability in themselves. People's memories were prone to error and easily swayed by emotions and biases, let alone when the defendant was a mute and defenseless animal. The statements of witnesses were even more readily accepted by the court. In some notable cases of animal trials, for example, in 1457, the case of the sow from Savigny in France, the court summoned as many as 9 named witnesses. Their testimonies ultimately led to the sow being sentenced to death. So in these trials against animals, what could truly be considered evidence? Besides these human oral testimonies, was there anything more objective? It was unlikely. In an era without forensic examination and lacking modern scene investigation techniques, the so-called evidence often consists of the victim's injuries, your presence at the crime scene, and various inferences people make based on your actions and behaviour. Various deductions made. For example, if there are traces of blood on you, even if it's your own, or if you show resistance or aggression when captured, that might simply be an instinctive reaction out of fear. All of these could be seen as evidence of your guilt. Even more absurdly, sometimes the court would even attempt to derive so-called malice from an animal's behaviour. For instance, there are records stating that when questioning witnesses, the judge paid special attention to the accused animal to see if it exhibited any potential malice. Of course, how such malice is defined and who interprets it, perhaps only heaven knows. You listen to those human witnesses exaggerate, twisting the truth in their stories. Your heart is filled with anger and resentment. How you wish you could speak, to tell them the truth about what happened, to tell them you're just an ordinary pig. Everything you've done was merely out of instinct, but you can't. You can only let out a few low, desperate grunts, and these grunts sound to those biased humans. Perhaps it has become evidence of your unrepentance, new proof of your stubbornness. From the very beginning, this trial was an unfair game. The witnesses are humans, the judges are humans. Even if there are lawyers, they are humans as well. All the rules are created by humans, and you, this poor pig, from beginning to end, you are merely a pawn to be manipulated, a vessel for human anger, fear, and the so-called justice. A sacrificial victim. Witnesses continue to take the stand one by one. Their stories grow increasingly bizarre and more sensational. You begin to feel numb. You no longer try to understand what they are saying, and you hold no illusions about this trial. You simply lie wearily on the cold ground, waiting for the inevitable verdict that was long foreordained. When those incessantly verbose human witnesses finally finish their compelling tales, a brief silence falls over the courtroom. Then you see the judge's stern face turn toward you, or to be more precise, toward the figure standing beside you, your pig advocate, your defender. The judge, in his emotionless tone, says, "Now it is your client's turn, this pig's turn, to deliver his defense argument." Upon hearing this, you almost couldn't help but snort through your nostrils. To ask you to present a defense, it's the funniest joke in the world. You are a pig. Your language consists of grunts, snorts, and squeals. These honourable human judges can understand none of it. Your lawyer has clearly recognised this dilemma as well. He cleared his throat, his face showing a hint of embarrassment, yet maintaining an air of feigned composure. He stepped up to your defendant's stand, bent down, and with a look that you could only describe as an attempt to communicate amicably with a pig, gazed at you. "Well, my dear client," he finally spoke, his voice deliberately low, as though afraid of disturbing the precious pearl that was you. "Regarding the accusations the prosecution has just made, do you have any objections to raise, or is there anything you'd like to explain to the court?" You blinked your small eyes at him. Of course, you had so much to say. You wanted to tell them that you didn't mean it, that you only wanted to protect your child. You wanted to tell them that you were scared and that you just wanted to go home. You wanted to tell them that keeping a pig locked up here and judging it by human law was such an absurd and laughable thing. So you took a deep breath and with all the strength in your body, let out a string of heartfelt, filled with grievance, fear, and anger, whimpering, grunting. Your testimony echoed through the solemn and dignified court, appearing particularly abrupt and untimely. A burst of uncontrollable chuckles came from the audience. Even those normally stern court officials had peculiar expressions on their faces. The judge furrowed his brow. He impatiently tapped the golden gavel in front of him, if such a tool existed in that courtroom. "Silence! Order!" he bellowed. "Defender, what is your client expressing here?" Your lawyer's expression looks worse than crying right now. He wiped the sweat off his forehead, struggling to organise his words. "Your Honour," he respectfully replied, "my client, although his earlier expression in form was rather peculiar, according to my understanding, he was expressing his feelings towards these accusations, feeling deeply wronged and confused. Yes, that's it." His frantic grunting fully conveyed his inner anxiety and innocence. His piercing screams were his protest against this unjust treatment. Hearing this brilliant interpretation, you are utterly amazed. This lawyer should really consider becoming a dream interpreter or fortune teller. What a waste of talent. He managed to extract such a rich meaning from your seemingly meaningless grunts, interpreting such profound implications. You are unaware that in that era, although animals could not directly defend themselves using human language, their actions and behaviour, and the interpretations humans made of them, sometimes they might indeed be accepted by the court as a form of indirect testimony. For example, historical records show that if the defendant animal behaved improperly in court, such as howling loudly or charging abruptly, this could even be taken as evidence against it, further intensifying its guilt. On the other hand, if it appeared docile and tame, this might be interpreted as having a good attitude toward admitting guilt. Even more bizarre, in cases involving groups of animals, such as rats or locusts. If these defendants, after being summoned by the court, fail to appear on time, their absence itself could be seen as a form of contempt of court or fleeing out of guilt. Of course, it is precisely in such cases that clever lawyers like Barthélemy de Chasseneur could come up with reasons such as "my client is afraid of cats on the road" as brilliant defences. Unfortunately, you are now staying in the court, unable to act on your own will. It's impossible for you to even consider being absent. You can only let your lawyer interpret your instinctive grunts and movements into all sorts of human logical defences. Moreover, Your Honour, your lawyer becomes more and more enthusiastic, as if actually understanding your grunts obtained some kind of magic. Please note my client's current posture. He is lowering his head. His eyes look dim. Isn't this a profound sense of regret and sorrow? He must be feeling sorrow for that unfortunate child, feeling sad. You are indeed lowering your head. Your gaze does indeed seem dim. But that's because you're both hungry and tired and completely despairing over this farce. It has nothing to do with regret or sorrow. It cannot be connected in the slightest. But the people in the courtroom seem to be listening intently. They were whispering to each other in hushed tones, as if they were genuinely pondering the profound implications of your testimony. You suddenly felt that this trial resembled a grand self-hypnosis conference for humanity. They clearly knew you were a pig. It was impossible for you to understand any of this, yet they insisted on solemnly completing all the legal procedures, including allowing you to speak, and then having someone else translate your pig language. Perhaps this was because, in their view, even when putting an animal on trial, it was necessary to grant it some kind of legal personality, allowing it to appear as though it had the right to a defense, just like a human, even though such a right was utterly illusory and absurd in reality. There were scholars, such as the aforementioned Mr. Chaste, who even argued in his writings that animals are capable of distinguishing right from wrong because they try to conceal their actions after committing wrongdoing or display fear and timidity when caught. This interpretation of animals' instinctive reactions, such as their fear of punishment, elevating them to the level of moral cognition, also provided a theoretical basis for animal trials, a theoretical basis that, at first glance, seemed somewhat reasonable. Your speaking time ended quickly. The judge did not seem moved by your heartfelt pig defense. He merely gestured expressionlessly for your lawyer to step down. Then he announced the court was adjourned. The verdict would be delivered on another day. You were tied up again, dragged back to that cold cell. You don't know how your grunts, in the ears of those humans, were interpreted into some groundbreaking words. You only know that you've done your best in the only way you know how, expressing your confusion and fear. As for the outcome, you can only leave it to fate. Oh, no. It's left to the whims of those self-assured humans. As you were escorted back to the cell to endure the long and tedious days awaiting the final verdict, you can still pick up snatches from the guard's chatter and occasional candid words from your visiting lawyer, catching glimpses of humans' peculiar views about animal offenders like you. Among them, the one that most, if pigs could feel confusion, confuses you, is their heated debate about whether pigs have souls. Yes, my friend, you heard me right. These two-legged creatures, before deciding whether to send you, this four-legged creature, to the gallows, they are still perplexed about the soul attribution problem, racking their brains over it. You might hear someone in a black robe who appears to be a scholarly teacher arguing with someone outside your cell. He might quote some ancient words in a language you don't understand, such as soul, copper, peccatum, and the like, which sound like some kind of mysterious incantation. He will cite scriptures and references, trying to prove that animals, or at least animals like you who have committed serious crimes, have some form of soul and are therefore capable of perceiving sin and must bear responsibility for their crimes. He might mention the story of Noah's Ark in the Bible, saying that when the flood came, God let all kinds of animals enter the ark in pairs. This indicates that animals have a place in God's plan and are not left out. He might also mention the account in Exodus about an ox goring a man to death, stating that the offending ox must be stoned to death. This also seems to suggest that animals need to bear the consequences of their actions. But soon, another well-dressed individual might step forward, perhaps your attorney, or maybe a dissenting scholar, to refute. They might claim that the soul of animals is entirely different from that of humans. Human souls were created by God in His own image and are rational and immortal. As for animals' souls, if they even possess them, they are more akin to a form of vitality or instinct. Animals cannot truly understand morality or laws, and thus they should not be judged by human standards. The Church's stance on this matter seems rather ambiguous as well. On one hand, they proclaim that only humans possess genuine souls capable of salvation or damnation. Once animals die, they have nothing left. Therefore, in theory, ecclesiastical courts cannot excommunicate animals in the same way they would excommunicate humans. But on the other hand, as you've heard before, ecclesiastical courts frequently conduct ceremonies to curse and expel destructive pests such as locusts, mice, and caterpillars. These rituals involve the formal acts of cursing and expulsion. This seems to be an acknowledgement of them having a certain spirituality that could be punished by the Church. This seemingly contradictory practice perhaps reflects the mindset of people at the time, when facing disasters that could not be explained rationally, such as the helplessness during the devastation of plague outbreaks, and a desperate attempt to resort to anything that might work. Since science could not solve the problem, they turned to religion and rituals, hoping that this approach could appease divine wrath, or at least provide themselves with some psychological comfort. You may not know that the question of whether animals have souls or possess moral cognition was a serious academic and theological issue in medieval Europe, and not just idle chatter among a few villagers in a tavern. It was far from mere drunken ramblings. Many scholars, theologians, and jurists of the time produced extensive writings on this topic. Some scholars, like Esther Cohen, believed that medieval people generally tended to attribute human reason and will to animals, thinking that animals could think and make decisions like humans. This anthropomorphic view naturally provided a certain rationale for animal trials. Since they could think like humans, then, of course, they could also commit crimes like humans and be punished. Other scholars, such as Swenkins, hold a more nuanced view. He believes that people in the Middle Ages were well aware that animals could not truly comprehend human laws and morality, nor could they have any criminal intent. However, when an animal's behavior caused severe harm to human society, especially when they injured or even killed humans, breaking the sacred order of humans as the essence of all worldly beings, people had to, through a public and ritualistic manner, re-establish this order, to proclaim that human authority is inviolable. The trial and execution of criminal animals was such a highly symbolic ritual. Furthermore, in that era, filled with superstition, It was widely believed that animals could be possessed by the devil or used as tools for witches to perform sorcery. For instance, if a normally docile pig suddenly became aggressive and bit someone, people would likely suspect whether it had been affected by some evil, or perhaps whether it was outright the embodiment of the devil. In such cases, the trial and execution of the pig, it is not just to punish its crime, but also to expel evil and purify the community. You might hear in the whispers of the guards them calling you a devil pig or a cursed beast. This sends shivers down your spine. You an ordinary pig, just like that. In the midst of humans' notions about souls, morality, order, and their complex and contradictory views on devils, you're tossed around helplessly. Your fate seems to hang on these abstract concepts you'll never comprehend. If they believe you have a soul and are capable of committing crimes, then your death would be justified. If they think you lack a soul and are merely a machine, then this malfunctioning machine should also be destroyed. If they deem you as a tool of the devil, then your death is all the more deserved. You twitch your ears, trying to shake off these convoluted thoughts from your simple pig brain. All you know is you're hungry, you're cold, you miss your children dearly. As for matters of souls, better leave that to the well-fed humans to worry about. You only hope this debate about your soul will end soon, so that you can die. Knowing why, or if you're lucky, can live knowing why. During your long and desperate wait, your attorney occasionally visits you. What he brought, aside from those legal terminologies that only confuse you further, and his pessimistic analysis of the case, would sometimes include some curious anecdotes about other animal defendants. These stories are like a faint glimmer in the darkness, making you realize that in this absurd world, you're not the only one who's unlucky. He would tell you that in a suburb not far from where you are, a group of audacious rats were formally indicted by the local ecclesiastical court for regularly stealing consecrated bread and relics from the church's storeroom. Yes, you heard it right. It was rats, and not just one, but a whole group of them. Reportedly, the court even went so far as to appoint a defense attorney for this group of rats. Naturally, the attorney's predicament was likely even more awkward than that of your own lawyer. After all, he couldn't possibly bring a group of rats into the courtroom. So instead, he argued fervently that his clients couldn't appear collectively in court due to their fear of cats along the way. Hence, they were unable to collectively attend the trial. Does this excuse sound familiar? That's right. This was one of the famous works of Bartholomew Chasseneux. Your lawyer will also tell you that earlier on in the Swiss city of Basel, a much stranger case had occurred. A rooster, for committing an unnatural and horrifying crime by laying an egg, was sent to the stake. In the eyes of people at the time, a rooster laying an egg was seen as a bad omen and considered a creation of witchcraft and black magic that could hatch into a creature called a basilisk, or a basilisk-like creature. This creature could kill humans and livestock with its gaze. Therefore, that unfortunate rooster paid with its life for an egg it inexplicably laid. It paid the price with its life. Hearing these stories, you might let out a few snorts of sympathy, or perhaps a more mocking grunt of schadenfreude. It seems that it's not just pigs like you, but even rats, roosters, and even smaller creatures that could be summoned to the courts of human law. Your lawyer will further explain that these animal trials were divided into different jurisdictions. For larger domestic animals like you, accused of directly harming or even killing humans, Such cases were usually handled by secular courts. The sentence was often death. However, for those swarming pests that cause damage to crops or public property, such as rats, locusts, caterpillars, weevils, flies, snails, or even dolphins. Yes, you read that correctly. Even dolphins were once put on trial. Such cases were mostly handled by ecclesiastical courts. The judgments from ecclesiastical courts were usually more lenient, such as curses, expulsion, or declare them unwelcome and order them to leave within a specified time. This sounds as if the human legal system has also categorized animal crimes into varying degrees of severity. You, a murderous pig, are undoubtedly among the most heinous offenders, which is why you are so prominently detained for trial, while those who merely stole some grain or nibbled on a few vegetable leaves only need a few prayers from priests to scare them off and settle the matter. However, not all animal defendants are as unlucky as you. Your lawyer will tell you that there were instances in history where animals received acquittals or at least had their sentences reduced. For example, he might mention the famous story of the virtuous donkey. In France, in 1750, a man named Jacques Ferrand and a female donkey were both accused of committing the crime of bestiality and were arrested together. During the trial, many highly respected local villagers jointly signed a declaration attesting to the donkey's upright character and simple way of living, demonstrating that it was a pure and kind-hearted donkey. He became involved in this scandal entirely due to that scoundrel Jacques Ferrand's coercion. In the end, the court accepted the villagers' opinion and declared the female donkey not guilty and set her free. As for the unfortunate Jacques Ferrand, he was sentenced to death by burning. Upon hearing this, you might feel a flicker of inspiration and a faint glimmer in your heart. An absurd hope. If even a donkey can escape punishment due to its noble character and acquitted, then for you, having committed manslaughter, but being inherently kind, is there still a glimmer of hope for you? You might not know these cases of animal trials were later meticulously collected by an anthropologist named Edward Payson Evans. He painstakingly organized these cases and authored a book titled The Criminal Prosecution and Capital Punishment of Animals. This book became an important reference for later generations studying this bizarre history. These various stories of animal trials are like a surreal painting, vividly unfolding before your eyes. They make you realize that human imagination and their knack for making trouble truly know no bounds. Humans not only seek to govern worldly affairs, but also impose their legal and moral beliefs onto you, the peaceful animals who are unconnected to worldly struggles. Some scholars believe that church courts trying pests were more symbolic acts. In that era when science was underdeveloped and people were helpless against natural disasters, such as pest infestations or plagues, this ritual provided solace. Through such religious ceremonies, they could offer fearful, unsettled communities a sense of psychological comfort, make them feel that we are taking action, thus maintaining social stability. And you, my friend, your case is of a different nature. You directly challenged human life and safety, and their self-righteous status as masters of all living things. What awaits you, therefore, is unlikely to be a mere curse and expulsion. But in any case, knowing that there are so many other animal companions who share your plight, in your heart, would you feel a bit less lonely and desperate? Perhaps. At least, on the way to the gallows or some other terrible instrument of punishment, you are not the only criminal feeling confused and wronged. It can be considered a type of black humor comfort, perhaps. During those nights when you toss and turn, unable to sleep, your attorneys, aside from bringing you depressing case analyses, might occasionally act like storytellers, and in a somber tone. Tell you about the illustrious exploits of pig predecessors who shared your distress. Perhaps they want to help you understand the situation. Or perhaps they want you to learn something from these precedents, to take some kind of lesson, although you have no idea what lesson you are supposed to learn. Maybe he just wanted to find someone to listen to him, to vent his frustration as the defense attorney for a pig. Melancholy, he would lower his voice and tell you in a mysterious tone, "You know, many pig brothers and sisters before you have been tried in human courts. Among them, the most famous would be Miss Pig, who was tried in 1386 in Falaise, France. That Miss Pig, your lawyer smacks his lips, showing a look on his face that's part regret and part professional excitement. He was accused of brutally murdering an infant. The evidence was conclusive. It was irrefutable. Therefore, the court sentenced him to death. But the most bizarre aspect was not the verdict itself." He paused, as if to build suspense, and then continued. Before the execution, they actually dressed him in a full set of human clothes. Yes, you heard that right. A tight little vest, a pair of gloves, loose breeches, and even on his pig head, they placed a human mask. Then, they dragged him to the square, in front of everyone. First, they brutally dismembered him, reportedly because he had done the same to the poor infant. Finally, they hanged him on the gallows. Hearing this, you might involuntarily shiver. Dressing up, wearing a mask, this was almost worse than being killed outright. In human imagination, in the torture of their kind or others, in this area, they certainly reached the pinnacle. Your attorney will also tell you that for this grand execution, the local government spent quite a bit of money. It was clearly recorded in the ledger to purchase new gloves for the executioner to wear during the sentence's execution. It cost 10 sous and 10 deniers. This certainly is full of ceremonial symbolism. It is said that the scene of the pig's execution at the time was even depicted in a mural, left on the walls of the local church, to serve as a warning to future generations, or perhaps future pigs. Aside from the fashion-conscious pig from Falaise, your lawyer continues his lecture on the history of swin-related crimes. There's another notable case. That is the 1457 trial in Savigny of Mother Pig. This Mother Pig, along with her 6 piglets, were accused of murdering a 5-year-old boy. After some deliberation, the court determined that Mother Pig was the main perpetrator, and her crime was unforgivable. She was sentenced to hanging, and moreover, in a rather peculiar manner, her 2 hind legs were tied to a tree, and she was hanged alive. As for the 6 piglets, the lawyer's tone became slightly more relaxed. The court considered their young age, and the fact that they were primarily influenced by their misbehaving mother. Additionally, there was no direct evidence proving their involvement in the murder, so in the end, they were merely sentenced to be placed under their owner's care. It can be considered as narrowly escaping disaster. This verdict makes your heavy heart seem to see a faint glimmer of light again. It turns out that human courts are not entirely devoid of pig compassion. At least for underage pigs, they would still show leniency. Your lawyer will also mention several sporadic pig-related cases. For example, in the year 1266, there was a pig that bit a child and was burned alive. He also emphasized, among all the animals brought to trial, you pigs are undoubtedly the most frequently featured celebrity defendants, without exception. This is probably because you live too closely with humans, and sometimes you don't pay much attention to dining etiquette or behavioral norms. The heroic deeds of these famous pig predecessors flash through your mind, one by one. You don't know whether you should feel sorrow for them or despair for yourself as you are about to follow in their footsteps. You might wonder, why do humans go to such great lengths to deal with you pigs? Is it merely because you committed a crime? Some scholars believe that this act of dressing pigs in human clothes before executing them carries profound symbolic meaning. Perhaps it is a form of mockery, mocking the arrogant beast for daring to imitate human crimes. Alternatively, this is a form of ritualistic anthropomorphism. By dressing the animal in human guise and punishing it in a human manner, thereby, in a symbolic sense, the human order, disrupted by animals, will be re-established. Some scholars interpret it from a psychoanalytic perspective, believing that such costumes and public executions are a form of collective psychological catharsis by projecting fear and anger onto an alienated scapegoat to alleviate the community's anxiety and trauma. Of course, these profound theories are far too distant for you. You only know that your predecessors, the pigs, met a tragic end, and you seem to be gradually heading toward a similar fate. Your lawyer finished telling these stories, sighed, and patted your pig head. "So, my friend," he said, "the situation is very unfavourable for you. But regardless, we have to go through the procedure. Maybe, just maybe, a miracle might happen." A miracle? You flicked your ears in response. For a pig about to be judged by humans, the greatest miracle would probably be humans suddenly experiencing collective amnesia, treating you as an ordinary pig, and returning you to the pigsty. But this is clearly impossible now. You can only mourn your predecessors, the pigs, and worry about your own fate as you await the judge's final decision. A merciless verdict. After enduring a lengthy and exhausting judicial process, including the testimonies of witnesses who twisted the facts, along with your brilliantly interpretable, pig-like utterances, the court finally reconvened, ready to deliver its judgment upon you. You are once again brought to that oppressive and fear-inducing courtroom hall. This time, there seem to be even more people in the gallery. Their faces all carry a look of anticipation for some ultimate decision. The air is filled with a palpable and indescribable tension. Even you, a sluggish pig, can sense the foreboding of an impending storm. The judge still sits upright on his lofty bench. His expression is more solemn than ever before. On the table before him lies an unfurled scroll of parchment, densely filled with texts you cannot comprehend. That must be your judgment. Your attorney, Ju Quan, stands not far from you. His complexion appears slightly pale, and his eyes are filled with a look that says he has done his best, but is exhausted and powerless. He casts you a brief, apologetic glance, then lowers his head. The courtroom is silent. All eyes are fixed on the judge. They are waiting for him to speak. You can even hear the sound of your poor pig heart pounding within your chest. Finally, the judge cleared his throat. He picked up the parchment. In a slow and solemn tone, he began to read the verdict. His voice echoed through the empty hall. Every word was like a little hammer, striking your heart. If you had one, that is. You couldn't understand the complex legal terminologies, but from his undeniable tone and the increasingly grim expressions of those around you, you had already sensed your fate. In summary, this court finds the defendant, a sow, whose name is unknown, on an unspecified date, in an unspecified location, had cruelly attacked and killed a human child. The evidence is conclusive, the crime unforgivable. As expected, she is guilty. This verdict, though anticipated by you when it actually came from the judge's mouth, you still felt a wave of despair wash over you. The judge paused. His sharp gaze swept over you and then continued reading. To uphold the justice of the law, to honor the innocent victim's spirit, and to warn all beings who dare to disrupt the sacred order, this court hereby pronounces the following judgment. He raised his voice, each word imbued with gravity. The defendant Sao is sentenced to death, immediate execution. Death penalty. These two words strike like a bolt from the blue, exploding in the chaos of your pig brain. Although you may not fully understand the meaning of the term death penalty, but from the sudden excitement of the humans around you, mixed with the faint cruelty in their expressions, you've already perceived its ultimate, irreversible horror. The judge sets down the parchment and picks up his small wooden gavel, the symbol of authority, or something else. A knock on the table produces a dull sound, as if marking the cold, cruel end of your brief and absurd legal journey. It punctuates with a harsh conclusion. You do not know, historically, most pigs accused of killing humans ultimately face the same fate as you, just like you, sentenced to death. Hanging was the most common method of execution. In certain cases, to enhance the symbolic punishment and deterrence, even more cruel methods were employed. For example, the aforementioned pig from Falaise, before being hanged, was dismembered, similar to how it harmed the baby. This reflects the primitive retribution concept in human law at the time, an eye for an eye, or a tooth for a tooth. Even when such principles were applied to an animal, they appeared remarkably serious. As for the mother pig from Savigny, it was sentenced to be hung upside down by its hind legs from a tree until death. This bizarre method of execution perhaps intended to increase its pain and humiliation, or perhaps merely a product of local customs, or the creativity of the judge. In some more extreme cases, pigs were even burned alive, or recorded as being buried alive. These cruel punishments were not just to end the animal's life, but also to publicly use a method of strong visual impact to vent human anger, consolidate human camaraderie, and satisfy some people's pitiful, twisted entertainment needs. When the judge pronounced the verdict, they usually included some righteous reasons, such as, in a 1494 verdict, the judge wrote, "Out of fear and horror for the stated crime, and to set an example and uphold justice, have stated, judged, sentenced, declared, and designated the said pig, now detained and imprisoned as a prisoner in the said monastery." Then the specific judgment content follows. These grandiose words were certainly not meant for you, the pig, but for those in the courtroom and those outside the courtroom to hear. The purpose was to emphasize the legality and legitimacy of the verdict. You stand there, feeling cold all over, with weak limbs, listening to the judge's cold and merciless pronouncement, looking at the faces of the humans around you, weighed down by gravity or gloating with schadenfreude. You suddenly feel this world is so unfamiliar, so unreasonable. You are just a pig. You just want to live, to eat your fill, to protect your children. What did you do wrong to deserve such a terrible punishment? But no one will answer your questions. In the face of human law, your life, your feelings, your confusion, all seems so insignificant. You are merely a criminal, an obstacle that needs to be removed, a scapegoat to uphold their fragile and self-righteous order. The judge's verdict, like an invisible shackle, firmly fastened around your neck. Your brief An ordinary pig existence seems about to end in such a way that is both absurd and tragic. A final conclusion. The judge's cold verdict feels like a massive boulder, crushingly pressing on your heart. You haven't yet recovered from the shock and fear brought by the word death sentence when a few rough-handed guards dragged you out of the courtroom. This time, they didn't take you back to the familiar bamboo basket prison, but instead delivered you to a place even more incomprehensible to you. It seemed like a hastily constructed backstage, or a venue prepared for some bizarre ritual. Then, you experienced the most bizarre and most humiliating scene of your life. A group of women with a look of mixed curiosity, pity, and a hint of a mischievous triumph on their faces, holding some brightly coloured fabrics and some oddly shaped accessories. They surrounded you. You stepped back in fright, unsure of what they intended to do with you. Could it be that before executing you, they wanted to groom and dress you up first? Your ominous premonition proved true. They began marking on your body, pulling and tugging, trying to force you into those garments, clearly not meant for a pig. A tight little vest made you feel like a tightly wrapped dumpling. A few tattered cloths were haphazardly wrapped around your legs by their many hands, which they grandly named lantern pants. Your two front hooves were forcibly stuffed into a pair of human gloves, rendering you utterly immobile. What you found most unbearable, however, was their attempt to place on your noble pig head a mask painted with a ridiculous human face. You frantically shook your head, letting out angry shrieks in an attempt to rid yourself of this absurd attire. But your resistance, in their eyes, perhaps it only added more amusement. In the end, you were still forced to wear this ridiculous human costume. You felt like a clown in a circus, or perhaps a villain in a poorly performed play. You looked down at the mismatched outfit you were wearing. Your heart was filled with endless sorrow and a sense of indescribable absurdity. You didn't know that this practice of dressing up animal offenders, especially pigs, in human clothing, actually existed in history. The most famous example dates back to 1386, with the pig of Falaise that was sentenced to death in France. Before its execution, it was elaborately dressed into a human-like pig form with a comical appearance. Why was this done? Scholars in later generations have speculated endlessly on this. Some believe it was an extreme act of mockery and humiliation, aimed at emphasizing how audacious this beast was to harm humans, how overconfident it was, and how laughable it was. Others consider it a ritualistic transformation. By dressing the animal to look like a human and then executing it in a human manner, it symbolically punished a person for committing a crime. Thus, psychologically, it becomes easier for human society to accept and understand. Furthermore, some scholars analyze from deeper cultural and psychological perspectives, believing that this disguising act is a de-identification strategy. By altering the criminal, whether it is a human or an animal's external appearance, it renders them unrecognizable, thereby projecting the community's fear, anger, and disgust onto an alienated subject to alleviate collective trauma and to re-establish the values and order of the community. Of course, these profound theories mean nothing to you. A pig dressed in a tight vest, wearing a human mask, they are completely meaningless. You only feel stifled, discomfort, along with a sense of utter despair at being completely toyed with. Once you are fully dressed in this absurd outfit, you are once again dragged along to your final destination. This is usually the central square of the town, or the gallows on a prominent hill outside the city. On this journey, your peculiar appearance naturally attracts a crowd of onlookers and bursts of laughter. They point at you, whispering among themselves, expressing various exclamations and ridicule. You even see some farmers deliberately herding their own pigs over to witness your final performance. It is said this is to slaughter one pig to warn the others, so that other pigs can take it as a warning and avoid making the same mistake again. This truly is a well-intentioned plan. Finally, you are taken to that towering horn-shaped scaffold, exuding a menacing aura. The executioner, a man with a ferocious face, a burly figure, has been waiting there for some time. Around his waist might be strapped with a sharp axe or butcher knife for contingencies. You see his rough, large hands wearing a pair of brand new gloves. Yes, just like the executioner of the pig of Falaise, this is also part of the procedure. It symbolizes the professionalism and impartiality of the execution. You are roughly shoved onto the gallows platform. The rope is fastened around your neck. You take one final look at this noisy yet indifferent human world. You glance at the faces of the onlookers. Those expressions, either numb or excited. You let out a low, deep, desperate wail, and then it all comes to an end. Your brief, peculiar, and enigmatic squeals, just like that, in a carefully orchestrated absurd fashion show by humanity and farewell ceremony, draw to a close. You may never understand why all of this happened to you, but your story is like a drop of ink falling into the long river of history, leaving behind a trace both absurd and thought-provoking. When your heavy body stops its final sway on the gallows platform, when the crowd of onlookers slowly disperses, carrying mixed emotions, when the executioner wipes the sweat from his brow while calculating the remuneration for this task, this unfortunate pig seemed as though it was meant to vanish completely from this world, turned to dust, leaving not a single trace. However, things were not so simple. Your story, or rather the story of animals like you being prosecuted, was not forgotten with your death. They are like peculiar, dusty specimens, carefully preserved in the archives of human history, becoming a piece of a tale both absurdly comical yet thought-provoking, a historical oddity. After your departure, time continued to flow and human society kept evolving. Those ideas that were once cherished by them like daughters, those truths they once believed in without question, also faded with the passage of time, gradually losing their luster and even entirely overturned. The practice of animal trials, although quite popular in your era, was not unshakable. Starting roughly in the 18th century, as human society entered the so-called Age of Enlightenment, this legal practice, now seen by modern people as both barbaric and absurd, then began to gradually decline. Why did this happen? Behind this was a profound transformation in human thought and perspectives. Some great thinkers began to view the world with a completely new perspective. They re-evaluated humanity itself, as well as animals like all of you. For example, a French philosopher named René Descartes, he proposed a deeply influential idea that animals in essence are more like intricate machines. They lack the complex, rational thinking and emotional experiences that humans possess. They can make sounds, move, eat, sleep, but these are more a result of automatic responses rather than true consciousness or a soul. This idea, at that time, might have sounded somewhat cold and heartless. It could even be seen as a form of disparagement towards animals like you. However, from another perspective, it fundamentally shook the theoretical foundation of animal trials. Think about it. If animals were nothing but soulless and morally unaware machines, then how could you expect a machine to be held accountable for its malfunctions, such as accidentally harming someone? How could it bear criminal responsibility? Prosecuting a machine would be nothing short of an absurd spectacle. Following this, more Enlightenment thinkers, such as Voltaire, Rousseau, Kant, and Jeremy Bentham, also explored, from different angles, the relationship between humans and animals, as well as questions around the rights and status of animals. Immanuel Kant believed that while animals themselves might not be an end, mistreating animals could harm humanity's own sense of morality. Therefore, the way we treat animals indirectly reflects our responsibility toward our fellow humans. As for Jeremy Bentham, he proposed a more direct and more famous view. He argued that when considering how to treat animals, the key question isn't, can they think, or can they speak, but rather, can they suffer? If animals are capable of suffering, so we should try our best to avoid causing them unnecessary suffering. These new ideas are like a breath of fresh air, blowing away the superstitions and prejudices that have surrounded animal trials since the Middle Ages. People began to realize that using human laws to prosecute animals was not only illogical, but also lacked compassion. As a result, cases of animal trials became increasingly rare. Eventually, in most European countries, this practice was gradually abolished. Records indicate that the last documented case of animal execution in France occurred around 1740. Of course, in some remote areas, sporadic incidents might still occur, but they were no longer widely accepted as legal practices. Instead, a new type of law emerged, laws related to animals. These are known as animal welfare laws. People no longer viewed animals as criminals, but began to focus on how to protect them from abuse and provide them with more humane living conditions. For example, in early 19th century Britain, the famous Martins Act was passed, which aimed to prevent cruelty to cattle and other livestock. This marked a shift in humanity's perception of animals, moving away from punishment toward protection. And you, my dear pig friend, your story, Sash, and the stories of those animal defendants who shared a similar fate with you were unearthed by later historians. For example, the previously mentioned Edward Payson Evans. They unearthed them from the piles of stubborn history and conducted research and documentation on them. To modern people, these medieval animal trials are undoubtedly absurd, brutal, and even somewhat laughable. They have become peculiar anecdotes in history, textbooks, and topics for casual conversation. However, there are also some scholars, such as Sven Gins, who remind us that we should not simply use a modern lens to mock and criticize medieval people. They lived in a world entirely different from ours, with a completely different worldview, value systems, and knowledge structures. In their view, animal trials might have had their own inherent logic and justification. It was their way of confronting the unknown, maintaining order, and seeking solace. Therefore, your legacy is not merely a historical oddity. It is more like a mirror, reflecting the evolution of human thought and ideas, reflecting the interplay between law and culture, and between reason and superstition in their complex and subtle interactions. It reminds us that what we consider to be natural and self-evident today may, at some point in the future, be regarded as unimaginable. And you, this pig that endured the trials in a medieval courtroom, though you did not leave behind any earth-shattering accomplishments, your drama-laden pig form, still, in its own unique way, on the long scroll of human history, left your own distinct and irreplaceable, a weighty proposal steeped in the scent of earth. All right, my friend, the story about you will stop here for now. The night is already late. I hope this slightly absurd and darkly humorous bedtime story didn't disturb your sweet dreams. After all, compared to those pig predecessors who truly experienced all of this, we are fortunate to lie peacefully in bed, listening to these ancient anecdotes, which is already a great blessing, isn't it? Good night.